Take a look at this graphic. It shows something called the Dunning-Kruger effect. This happens when a person's lack of knowledge or skill in a certain area causes them to overestimate their own competence. As an example, someone might read a newspaper article or a book about the economy and believe they understand how macroeconomics work. This is a very complicated system. By contrast, it makes those with a deeper knowledge underestimate their abilities. This happens because as you acquire deeper knowledge, you realize how much more there is to learn. And after 20 years of full-time professional investing myself, I need to tell you the uncomfortable truth. Many of the retail investors I meet are somewhere here on the graph. This may mean your perception of what's good and what's bad, what's safe and what's risky are potentially slightly off. So today I'm going to try and fast forward your learning and explain the big misconception about risky investments. 10 investments you think are safe but maybe aren't, and where you should be putting your money instead. And in order to do that, we first need to understand what risk actually means, because many people don't. People often say to me, I don't want any risk. And I always say back, what exactly do you mean by that? Because using the word risk without context is like saying, I love without finishing the sentence. I love weekends, I love my phone, I love to travel. Same word, but all completely different meanings. And risk is exactly the same. It means absolutely nothing on its own. The question of whether an investment is safe or risky all comes down to context and the different types of risk. What might be risky for one person could be very safe to you. And to bring this to life, I'm going to show you something called the Uninformed risk scale. I first saw this explained by the financial expert Andy Hart. It shows you 10 investments through the eyes of a beginner, an investment novice, ranked in order from 1 as something that most people consider very safe, through to 10, something so risky it keeps them lying awake at night time. So, we'll take a look at the same investments through the eyes of an expert, and I'm certain this will help transform your perception of risk. So at number 1 on the beginner's scale is what most people consider their ultimate safety net. You can always see it, you can always access it, and you always know exactly how much of it you have. It's the most basic form for storage of your hard-earned cash. Any guesses? It's the regular old bank account. For a lot of people starting out, cash in their bank account, in current accounts or in fixed term deposits feels like the ultimate safety net. And number 2, we have something that sounds incredibly boring, and that's why many people trust it. Think of it like lending money to your richest best friend. They promise to pay you back with interest, which sounds great. But in this case, instead of lending to a rich friend, you're actually lending to the government. In case you haven't already guessed, I'm talking about government bonds. To most beginners, this seems like a pretty safe bet. After all, what are the odds that a government won't pay you back? Number 3 is another type of lending that beginners often see as pretty low risk. But instead of lending to the government, you're lending to big established companies. Companies that have been around for a long time and seem likely to stick around for a long time more. What are we talking about here? Well, I'm talking about corporate bonds. For a lot of beginners, if a big corporation promises to pay you back in the future, that seems like a pretty solid investment. Now, number 4 has a special appeal. It's the kind of investment that makes people say, now this is real. And you can perhaps understand why. It's something that you can actually see, touch, and show off to your friends. In fact, some cultures are so convinced by this investment that it's practically a religion. In case you haven't already guessed, I'm talking about property. A lot of absolute beginners are drawn to property because it looks and feels and is a concrete, understandable investment, because people will always need places to live, right? Number 5 is something you see in fancy brochures. This is what the wealthy invest in, they say. It's got a little bit of everything in here. Shiny gold bars, complicated hedge funds, venture capital, fancy investments like private equity. It's an asset class called commodities and or alternatives. The big attraction with this is either the status and prestige of owning them, or perhaps the promise of non-market correlated return. The idea being that when the stock market goes down, these ones might not. Investment novices know some people who have made money in them, but they're typically not entirely sure exactly how. Number 6, an investment that beginners find very alluring and attractive. You see it all across the financial news and trending on social media. Investments double. Sometimes they triple, and even 10x in no time at all. And you hear about normal people just like you retiring early, buying dream homes, and living their best life thanks to these types of investments. So the FOMO starts creeping in, and you begin wondering if you're the only one missing out. These are the types of investments that fall into the category we call what is working now category. Artificial intelligence, cannabis stocks, NFTs, crypto, to name just a few. Now, number 7 brings us to something that scares many people to death. They think about the Wall Street movies. They think about market crashes in 1989, the dot-com crash of 2001 or 2008. It's fascinating because this is where the really big divide happens between the people who understand what this investment really is and the people who only know what the news tells them. Wondering what this is? Well, this is the entire stock market, or as professionals call it, global equities. I like to call it the great companies of the world, the types of companies that you and I buy stuff from every day. For a lot of beginners, investing in stocks feels like a high-stakes game, like walking into a casino and placing everything on black or red. They hear stories of people striking it rich, but also of people losing everything. For many people, it's a scary place to be. And number 8, we have something that almost feels like the absolute opposite of cash. It's so intangible and far removed, it feels like you're sending your money off into oblivion. And even when I explain to people that this asset represents hundreds and hundreds of millions of people in countries where the middle class is growing faster than anywhere else in the world, they're still petrified by the idea of sending their money there. If you haven't already guessed, I'm talking about emerging market equities. And whilst you might be scared to invest in these fast-growing economies, you're probably already using their technology, wearing their clothes, and eating their food. You just don't realize it. Moving up to our final 2 spots on the uninformed risk scale are the investments that many beginners consider to be the riskiest. And they're actually 2 variations of the same strategy. It's the investment approach that creates all those dramatic headlines that you see. Investor turns $1,000 into $100,000. How I made millions with one trade. Because you can get lucky and you can get 50x, 100x returns that everyone talks about. So, at number 9, we have single large company shares, i.e. betting everything on one established company, such as Apple. And in at number 10, considered even riskier, single small company shares, gambling on the next big thing, like Uber before it got big. Is how 99% of the world understand investments and their levels of risk. But let's think back to the Dunning-Kruger effect. Remember, this isn't fact. This is all about perception. So let's look at how informed investors, perhaps professionals with decades of experience or even university academics and Nobel laureates in economics, view the exact same investments and where they place them on the risk scale. Well, look at the informed risk scale. In at number 10 on the informed risk scale, the most risky we have is whatever is working now. This financial junk has been created by a hyper-capitalistic traditional financial service industry to get you to buy because people like buying new shiny things. These are typically easy to sell ideas with big advertising budgets and interesting backstories that appeal to the instincts, perhaps the greed, of the uninformed investor. But the thing with what's working now is that it has a nasty habit of stopping working, usually right after you invest in it. And so to the well-informed, they avoid anything which is working now, as this wide category of hot now ideas is the single most dangerous thing that you can do to your life's savings. In at number 9, we have investing in a single small cap share. You can win big sometimes. But smart investors don't invest serious long-term money based upon big promises or on FOMO. It's been proven these investments are extremely hard to predict even for professional investment managers, and striking it big can arguably be put down more to luck than any skill. At 8, we have investing in single large cap shares, because again, you can completely wipe out your capital, and picking these can be like finding a needle in a large haystack. And that's why all of these top 3 are very dangerous and in the red zone. Yes, you can win big by speculating. Some people do. But you can also lose big as well. The red zone is characterized by the worst type of risk to a sensible, well-informed investor. This is the risk of permanently losing your capital. Moving on, number 7 is cash. Cash is king only for very short-term cash flow requirements. But educated, well-informed investors really understand that long-term cash is pauper, because inflation is eating away at cash in the long term, even when it's sitting in a fixed term deposit account. Your future purchasing power is being eroded and the value of your money is dying. At 6, we have government bonds, and at number 5, we have corporate bonds for the same reason. Remember, we lend money to governments and big companies when they're short of money, i.e. when they have a deficit. But they wouldn't borrow it if they didn't expect they'd able to put it to work at a premium. These higher premiums are paid to the owners of the companies, not the lenders to them. Lenders therefore get lower premiums, which again mean that inflation may potentially erode your future returns. The value of your future money can ultimately wither away and die in both cash and bonds because of the insidious effect of inflation. Number 4 is commodities and alternatives. Sometimes you can win big, but sometimes not. You may face some loss of capital, but are much more likely to just lose your future purchasing power compared to other asset classes because of inflation. So these 4 are all in the amber zone. You don't have the risk of losing all of your capital, but you do have the risk of losing out on future purchasing power or inflation risk. And the final 3 are the green zone, where your risk is different. It's the risk of volatility. Now, volatility can be an extremely hard type of risk to stomach because it's extremely emotional. Think of it as a fairground ride. You can choose either to go on the kids' carousel or big roller coaster. You'll ultimately get a much bigger thrill on the roller coaster, as long as you don't get off whilst it's still moving. So, what will the final 3 be? i.e. the safest investments according to the well-informed risk scale. In at number 3, we have emerging market companies, i.e. a broad holding of all the emerging market equities around the entire world. Now, why is this? Well, there's no chance of the loss of capital. They're not all going to go down to zero. If that happens, we have world Armageddon and bigger issues to think about than our investments. But they are volatile. Don't get me wrong. They will absolutely hammer inflation in the long term. And you always need to take some form of risk if you want to make good returns. So volatility is a good flavor of risk to choose in order to get these stellar returns. In other words, stomaching volatility is the price that we all have to pay to get higher expected returns. And number 2 out of 10 is an asset class that I like because it does 2 really important things which qualify it as a real asset class. Number 1, it provides a rising income over time. And number 2, it provides a rising capital value over time. And we can back these 2 things up with long-term historical data. So, what am I talking about here? Property. And there's an even more efficient way for experts to access the benefits of this asset class than many people know about. One where you can invest in a diversified basis as opposed to taking a punt on a purely residential house price in a single town. So make sure you subscribe to this channel for more information on how to do exactly that. And that brings us to number 1, the least risky financial item to invest in on the informed risk scale. It's in the top spot because there's a very low chance of loss of capital. And there's also decades of evidence that proves this hammers inflation in the long term. It is volatile. You just need to ride out that short-term volatility. But it is also safe because you're investing in thousands and thousands of companies and very well diversified. I'm talking, of course, about global equities, or the great businesses of the world. History, data, and science being our guide is evidence that systematically accessing the great companies of the world can have a profoundly positive impact on your future purchasing power over time. However, I appreciate this might all sound quite abstract. So, if you want to see exactly how our clients or I myself invest my money, check out this video next where I reveal exactly how my portfolio is split and which funds I'm invested in.